The yellow glow of the streetlights cast long shadows across Dreadford's cracked sidewalks as Daniel Reed stepped out of the public library, a bundle of blood bags tucked into his jacket. The city's chill gnawed at him, but he barely noticed. His focus was on the sleek black car idling by the curb, its engine purring like a restrained predator. Leon lounged in the driver's seat, his sharp features lit by the cold blue glow of the dashboard. The vampire's grin was crooked, equal parts charm and malice, as he watched Daniel approach.
"Grab a bedtime story while you were in there?"
Leon drawled, tapping his fingers against the steering wheel. Daniel ignored the jab and slid into the passenger seat, pulling the blood bags free.
"I got the blood,"
he said curtly, holding them up. Leon's grin widened as he glanced at the bags.
"Aren't you the Boy Scout? How'd you know she'd help? Witches aren't exactly the charitable type."
"She has her reasons,"
Daniel replied. He turned his gaze to the dim cityscape outside the window.
"One of the midnight fiends matters to her."
Leon let out a low chuckle, his fingers drumming faster. He threw the car into gear and the engine roared, the tires squealing as they peeled away from the curb. For a moment, neither spoke, the hum of the car filling the silence. Then Leon broke it, his tone suddenly serious.
"We've got the blood and we've got time. You still up for hitting the circus tonight?"
Daniel turned his head slightly.
"You think the two of us can take on Pagliacci's crew? They outnumber us, and by your own account, they've got some hard power."
Leon's grin turned feral, a glint of danger flashing in his eyes.
"Numbers don't mean shit if they're outgunned. The carrion eaters left behind enough firepower to start a small war. It's all sitting in the trunk. With a little creativity, it's our force multiplier."
Daniel raised an eyebrow, skepticism bleeding into his voice.
"If you had that kind of arsenal, why didn't you use it?"
Leon's grin faltered, replaced by a shadow of bitterness.
"Because we thought we didn't need it. We wanted to take down the midnight fiends claw for claw, prove we were capable of doing it with our gifts and wits. No shortcuts. But that pride left the carrion eaters unarmed when the circus struck, and us with options."
The city blurred past them, streetlights fading as the urban sprawl gave way to shadowed fields and distant woods. In the far distance, the faint glow of the circus lights pierced the darkness like a beacon. As the car hurtled toward the circus, both vampires fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Daniel leaned back in his seat, his eyes narrowing. This would be no simple rescue mission. It would be war. The circus grounds lay under a shroud of oppressive silence, the muted glow of flickering bulbs casting grotesque shadows on the tattered tents. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and something acrid, like old blood. Daniel and Leon stepped out of the car, their boots crunching softly against gravel.
"Showtime,"
Leon muttered, popping the trunk. Inside was an arsenal that would make a mercenary blush, sawed-off shotguns with dragon's breath rounds, reinforced combat armor, and a collection of knives, grenades, and stakes. Daniel grabbed a shotgun, slinging it over his shoulder, as Leon slipped on a lightweight vest designed for maximum mobility. They worked in silence, the tension palpable as the moonlight gleamed off polished steel. They exchanged a brief nod before melting into the shadows, their forms swallowed by the eerie carnival grounds. Inside the big top, Pagliacci's circus vampires reveled in grotesque abandon. The smell of spilled blood mingled with laughter as it echoed off the canvas walls. Bound and unconscious, members of the Midnight Fiends and Carrion Eaters lay in a heap at the center of the tent. A hulking beastmaster loomed nearby, lazily stroking the head of a grotesque hybrid creature that snarled in its sleep. Pagliacci himself sat atop a throne cobbled together from circus debris, his painted face split in a manic grin.
"Enjoy it while it lasts. Tomorrow, we send these leftovers to our sponsor. But tonight, we celebrate."
The cheer was cut short by a thunderous explosion. A plume of fire and debris ripped through the side of the tent, sending vampires scattering. Through the smoke and chaos, Daniel and Leon emerged, shotguns blazing. Daniel moved with cold precision, each pull of the trigger, sending incendiary rounds into the heart of the chaos. One of the Beastmaster's monstrous pets, an unholy fusion of wolf and serpent, lunged for him, only to be incinerated mid-leap by a dragon's breath round. Leon darted through the confusion like a wraith, his speed slowing the world around him. A dagger flashed in his hand, cutting through tendons and throats of familiars with surgical efficiency. The Beastmaster roared in fury, hurling a massive net at Leon. But the vampire sidestepped with inhuman speed, closing the distance in a blink.
Nice pets.
Leon said before ramming a grenade into the Beastmaster's chest and vaulting backward. The resulting explosion left little more than a smoking crater where the Beastmaster had stood. A sudden high-pitched cackle drew their attention. The midget vampire in a garish clown costume launched himself at Leon with uncanny speed. Mid-air, Leon caught him by the throat and slammed him into the dirt. Daniel moved in for the kill, aiming a stake at the clown's heart. Before it struck, the vampire erupted into a swarm of screeching bats scattering into the air.
Cool trick.
Daniel muttered, switching to his shotgun. Leon raised a hand, his powers slowing the swarm just enough for Daniel to shoot a dragon's breath round through it. The bats shrieked as flames consumed them, leaving nothing but ash. Their brief victory was shattered by a deafening howl. The wolfman charged into the fray, his massive form ripping through the remnants of the tent. His yellow eyes gleamed with feral rage as he lunged, claws swiping through the air with enough force to cleave steel. Leon dodged nimbly, but even his enhanced reflexes couldn't entirely evade the wolfman's assault. A glancing blow sent him sprawling. Daniel fired round after round into the beast, but the incendiary shells barely slowed it down.
Got any ideas?
Leon called, rolling to his feet.
Working on it.
Daniel shouted as he reloaded. Before they could regroup, the air shimmered. Pagliacci's voice echoed around them, twisted and mocking.
You made a mess of my party, boys. Time for a last laugh.
The battlefield distorted, the ground shifting beneath their feet. Bright lights and swirling colors disoriented them as the tent seemed to reshape itself into a kaleidoscope of horrors. Daniel fired blindly, his sixth sense trying to cut through the illusion, but Pagliacci's gift of the blood was too strong. Leon's voice cut through the haze.
It's a trap! Move!
The ground suddenly gave way beneath them, dropping the pair into a hidden chamber. Metal walls closed in around them, the grinding sound of machinery filling the air. Daniel's eyes darted to the ceiling, where rotating blades hung menacingly. Leon cursed under his breath as he scanned the room for an exit. Pagliacci's laughter echoed from above.
Welcome to my fun house. Let's see how long you last in the compactor.
The walls groaned as they began to close in, the sharp scent of grease and rust filling the air. Daniel and Leon stood back to back, frantically searching for a way out as the machinery threatened to crush them. Daniel forced a smile, trying to lighten the mood.
We can only hope to survive this.
Leon snorted, a bitter laugh escaping his lips.
Hope? Don't make me laugh, Danny.
He turned his head slightly, glancing at him.
Did you have a nice family? Play catch with your dad? Mom bake cookies for you and your friends?
Daniel hesitated.
They did, actually.
Leon smirked, his expression dark.
Well, I had a mom hooked on pills who couldn't boil an egg, and a dad with a shitty job who liked to drink to forget his shitty life. He was a mean drunk, though. Every day he'd come home and beat me and my brother over stupid stuff. And one day, Mom took so many pills she didn't wake up.
Daniel stayed quiet, letting Leon talk.
After that, Dad got drunk all the time, lost his job, came home one night and beat me so bad he almost killed me.
Leon's tone turned colder, harder.
You see, Daniel, people like me don't have the luxury of hope. Hope's like a dream, only real when you're asleep. We've got goals. The goal of not getting beat up today. The goal of finding a car to get the hell out of that house. The goal of making money.
Daniel studied Leon, sensing the layers of resilience in his companion. Beneath his bravado, Leon was a survivor.
That's why you like cars.
Daniel said after a pause.
They helped you escape.
Leon's voice dropped lower.
Maybe.
What happened to your dad?
What about him?
You said your mom died from the pills. What happened to your dad?
After my dad almost killed me, my brother Tony made sure he wasn't going to almost kill anyone ever again.
That's dark.
Life's dark, Daniel.
Leon met his gaze with steely eyes.
And when life gives you shit, you throw it right back in its face.
Daniel hesitated, then spoke softly.
Your brother sounds like he meant a lot to you.
Leon's face softened, though his voice stayed firm.
Tony did everything for me. He got me clothes for prom, went to juvie for me, kept me safe from Dad. He wasn't perfect, not by a long shot, but he wasn't trash either. Just a guy trying to make it in this world who made a lot of mistakes.
His hands clenched into fists.
I thought taking down Vittorio would fix it, that it'd make the emptiness go away, but it didn't. Destroying him didn't bring Tony back.
Daniel felt a pang of sympathy as Leon's grief poured out. He thought of Vittorio, the suave mobster who had caused so much pain.
I didn't know.
Leon shrugged bitterly.
How could you know? Now all I've got left is my goals. Right now that's getting the hell out of here and giving that clown Pagliacci a serious ass-kicking.
Daniel drew a breath, his voice steady.
I admire you, Leon.
Leon blinked, surprised.
You admire me for what?
You're not like most of the tower vampires I've met. You've got restraint. You are not bloodthirsty. A lot of the ones I've dealt with in the King's Court don't even try.
Leon tilted his head, his brow furrowing.
What are you trying to say, Danny?
Daniel hesitated, then spoke, his voice laced with gravity.
While the Midnight Fiends were investigating the Carrion Eaters, we found something. About your brother.
Leon stiffened, his breath catching.
Tony, what about him?
Don Vittorio killed him because he thought Tony was stealing money from one of his businesses.
Daniel's voice softened.
Your brother was innocent, Leon. The money was being stolen by Javier Chavez, a member of your crew. Javier set Tony up to take the fall.
Leon froze, the words hitting him like a punch to the gut. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air.
Javier.
Leon's voice was a low growl, his fists trembling. His eyes hardened with fury, then shifted to determination.
We're not dying here.
Daniel nodded.
That's my goal now.
Leon's voice steadied, his resolve clear.
Let's smash this thing and get out of here. Then Javier's gonna answer for what he did.
Galvanized, the two worked in sync. Leon focused, using his speed manipulation to slow the compactor's grinding mechanisms. Daniel reached out with his sixth sense, scanning for a weakness in the structure. His eyes locked onto a rusted joint in the machinery.
There! Hit that spot!
Leon shot the joint with his shotgun, while Daniel shot at another one. The compactor groaned under the force and the mechanism shattered. With a deafening crash, the trap collapsed around them, leaving them bruised, but alive. Daniel caught his breath, glancing at Leon.
You good?
He asked. Leon nodded, his jaw tight.
I've got a goal now, Reed, and I'm not stopping till it's done.
The cacophony of the compactor's collapse echoed through the grounds. The circus vampires stood frozen, their grotesque faces twisting in shock as dust and debris billowed from the shattered trap. Suddenly, a belt full of grenades tumbled into their direction, its pins conspicuously missing. The circus vampires' eyes widened in fear as they scrambled to find cover, but their reactions were too slow. The grenades detonated in a thunderous explosion, fire and shrapnel ripping through the air. Screams were swallowed by the blast as the ground shook, leaving chaos and destruction in its wake. From the wreckage emerged Daniel and Leon, their eyes blazing with determination.
You might have the grand finale, but the people still need the encore.
Leon spat. Daniel surveyed the empty place.
We don't have much time. Let's rescue our people.
The circus vampires were still reeling, their disbelief granting Daniel and Leon the window they needed. They moved swiftly to where their crews lay motionless in vampiric slumber. Daniel's hands were already reaching for the bags of blood they'd managed to secure earlier.
Time to wake the dead.
One by one, they poured the potent ichor into the mouths of their crew members. The transformation was immediate, eyes snapping open, fangs gleaming as their vampiric hunger surged. The Midnight Fiends and the Carrion Eaters rose, their weakened forms reinvigorated by the stolen lifeblood. Pamela from the Midnight Fiends was the first to stand, shaking off her stupor.
Took you long enough, Daniel.
She growled, cracking her knuckles.
I was starting to think you'd bailed.
Not my style. Now let's finish this.
Daniel replied. Leon had a palpable darkness in his eyes as he delivered the blood to awaken Javier.
We have a score to settle.
He thought.
But first, we've got a circus to burn down.
The two factions quickly armed themselves with whatever they could find, makeshift weapons, broken pipes, and their own sharpened instincts. For now, their shared hatred of the circus vampires united them. From the shadows, a guttural laugh echoed. Pagliacci stepped into view, his painted face twisted in malevolent glee. Behind him, His troop of grotesque vampires slinked forward, their movements predatory and theatrical.
Well. The rats found their way out of the trap. How resourceful.
Pagliacci cooed, his voice a velvet mockery. Daniel stepped forward, his voice cold and sharp.
Your show's over.
Pagliacci's smile widened, baring his fangs.
Oh, but the curtain hasn't fallen yet. Shall we see who takes the final bow?
With a gesture from the clown, the circus vampires lunged, their movements a chaotic blend of acrobatics and bloodlust. The midnight fiends and carrion eaters met them head-on, the clash erupting in a whirlwind of snarls, fists and flashing blades. The chamber devolved into chaos, a cacophony of violence and vengeance. Blood sprayed across the walls as the two sides fought for their survival. Pamela tore through the fray with feral precision, her fists delivering bone-crushing blows to familiars who crossed her path. Then the roar of a chainsaw echoed nearby as a vampire swung wildly at Pamela. Sparks flew as the teeth screeched against her hardened skin, leaving shallow cuts that healed almost instantly.
Is that all you've got, big guy?
Pamela taunted, stepping closer. Her endurance seemed to unnerve the huge vampire, who growled in frustration and hurled the chainsaw at her in a last-ditch effort. Pamela sidestepped the attack, her smirk widening. From the shadows, Stephanie emerged. Her right sleeve hung empty, a cruel reminder of what she had lost during her previous fight against Mr. Chainsaw. The wound had healed, but the absence of her arm remained a phantom weight at her side. Her remaining hand moved with purpose, fingers weaving intricate patterns in the air as dark energy crackled between them. Darkness coalesced around her, forming into a massive, jagged construct of shadows.
Let's see how you like this.
Stephanie hissed. The vampire tried to dodge Stephanie's attack, but Pamela held him long enough for the shadow construct to tear into him, slicing through in a storm of shadow and screams. His body crumbled into ash, scattered by an unseen wind. High above the ground, the trapeze vampires leapt from platform to platform, their agility a blur of motion. They rained attacks down on Tom and Wade, their weapons slicing through the air with deadly precision. Tom crouched low, his eyes narrowing as his echolocation painted the room in sharp relief.
They're fast, but they can't hide.
Good.
Wade growled, cracking his knuckles.
I'm faster.
As the trapeze artists swung in for another pass, Tom gave the sign and Wade dashed forward, his supernatural speed blurring his form. He leapt, grabbing one of the vampires mid-air and slamming them into the ground with bone-crushing force. The other vampire tried to flee, but Tom was already scaling the platform like a spider, cutting off her escape route. With a snarl, he dropped from above, pulling the trapeze vampire down into Wade's waiting grasp. Together, they crushed their foe in a synchronized attack, their combined strength leaving no trace of the performers, but floating embers in the air. As the battle raged on, it became clear the tide was turning. The reinvigorated midnight fiends and carrion eaters fought with ferocity born of fury and vengeance, their unity overpowering the disorganized chaos of the circus vampires. Pagliacci's laugh echoed eerily as he darted between Daniel and Leon, his form flickering like a mirage. His claws lashed out, scoring deep gouges in the stone walls.
Keep your eyes on him.
Leon barked, his shotgun at the ready.
He's slippery.
Daniel tightened his grip on his stake, his focus unshaken.
We've got this. Stay close.
Pagliacci lunged, his illusions disorienting. But Daniel and Leon moved in perfect sync, their strikes coordinated to cover each other's blind spots. A precise blow from Daniel's stake finally landed into the clown's heart, sending Pagliacci sprawling. As his body crumpled, Pagliacci let out one final laugh. His form shimmered and shrank, transforming into a grotesque toy clown. The two stared at the unsettling figure, unsure if their foe was truly defeated or if he had escaped in some twisted way. Daniel wiped blood from his face, his voice ringing out above the din.
Push them back! Take them down!
And they did, with unrelenting force. The circus vampires, once so confident in their twisted games, now found themselves outmatched, their grotesque show unraveling in a torrent of violence and blood. The hulking form of the Dagon, with his amphibian features and razor-sharp claws, lunged at Isabella. She moved with blinding speed, her learning from their previous fight evident in every precise strike. Within moments, her improvised weapon found its mark, ending the Dagon's eternity in a burst of ash. The wolfman roared in fury, charging her with savage strength. His claws raked against her arm, drawing blood, but Isabella refused to falter. She ducked, rolled, and struck, her persistence matching the beast's raw power. The fight was brutal, every strike met with counterattacks that pushed her to the brink, but her agility and quick thinking ultimately gave her the edge. With a final, decisive blow, she drove a pipe into the wolfman's heart, his body collapsing in a heap. The juggler's weapons filled the air, a whirlwind of blades, fire, and stakes. His precision was unmatched, each projectile narrowly missing Oliver and Javier as they dodged and countered. Oliver's form began to shift, scales rippling across his skin as his dragon-like demonic form emerged. With a roar, he charged, his claws deflecting the juggler's barrage. Javier's telekinesis added to the assault, wrenching weapons from the air and hurling them back at their wielder, who could barely dodge. Together, they forced the juggler onto the defensive. In a dramatic finish, Oliver's claws tore through the juggler's chest, while Javier's telekinetic force crushed his remaining weapons. The juggler fell, his act brought to a permanent close. The air grew cold as the cloaked enchantress summoned tendrils of darkness and ice, each one lashing out with deadly precision. Julio countered with a fiery blast, the flames clashing against the dark tendrils in a shower of sparks.
Watch your left, my love.
Cristina called, as she summoned an earthen barrier to block an attack aimed at Julio.
Thanks,
he grunted, hurling another fiery burst. Despite their differences, their teamwork was undeniable. The enchantress fought fiercely, her chilling magic creating an oppressive atmosphere, but Cristina's earth constructs and Julio's fire wore her down. With a final devastating strike, Cristina used a statue's stone fist to crush the enchantress, her body dissolving into black mist. One by one, the grotesque performers fell, their theatrics no match for the sheer determination of their prey-turned predators. Their once mighty troop reduced to scattered ash and silence. The battlefield was eerily quiet now, the chaos of combat replaced by the crackle of distant flames and the settling dust. The air was thick with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid scent of burned flesh. The surviving vampires stood amid the wreckage. Pamela stretched, rolling her shoulders as if shaking off the tension.
Well, that was a mess.
She muttered, shooting a glance at Stephanie.
You all right?
Stephanie nodded, her shadowy constructs already dissipating into the dim light.
For now.
Her gaze shifted to her right arm, which was missing from the elbow below from her first battle against Mr. Chainsaw. Her sight flickered toward Wade, who stood apart, arms crossed and eyes sharp. His scrutiny was palpable, a silent accusation. Across the room, Javier wiped soot from his face, his expression grim.
Man, we can't stand around congratulating ourselves. The job's not finished.
Cristina, still holding fragments of stone magic in her hands, agreed.
The job was to take them back to the tower.
Javier stepped forward, his demeanor cold and authoritative.
Man, this shit was not about the circus. It was about capturing them.
Leon, standing beside Daniel, raised a hand to silence the rising tension.
Enough.
All eyes turned to him.
We're done here. We retreat. I'll take responsibility for the failure.
Javier stiffened, his jaw tightening as his eyes locked onto Leon's.
Man, you think the tower's gonna let us slide? You think?
I said.
Leon interrupted, stepping closer, his gaze burning into Javier's with an almost predatory intensity.
We retreat. I'll deal with the fallout.
The weight of his words hung in the air, and for a moment Javier hesitated. Then slowly he inclined his head, his acquiescence clear, despite the resentment simmering beneath the surface. Cristina bristled, stepping toward Leon.
You can't just call it like that.
I just did. Rookie.
Leon snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut through her protest. His tone left no room for argument. From the sidelines, Wade's gaze remained fixed on Stephanie. His silence was unnerving, and she felt the weight of his unspoken suspicion. For a fleeting moment their eyes met and she could see it, the mistrust, the questions he wouldn't ask aloud. She broke the stare, her fingers twitching as if she wanted to summon her shadows again.
We retreat. There's nothing more to gain here.
Stephanie said suddenly. Cristina rounded on her, disbelief etched across her face.
You're agreeing with this?
I am.
Stephanie replied, her tone colder than before.
Let's go.
The carrion eaters began to regroup, pulling back toward the exit. Julio threw one last frustrated look at Cristina, who avoided his gaze before turning to follow.
Cristina, we should talk.
Not now, not here.
she answered. As the carrion eaters began to withdraw, Leon paused, standing toe-to-toe with Daniel.
This doesn't make us friends.
Leon said, his voice low but laced with meaning. Daniel folded his arms, his expression unreadable.
Never said it did, but at least now we know where we stand.
The two men exchanged a long stare, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Neither would admit it, but respect lingered in the space between their hostility. Without another word, Leon turned and followed his crew. The carrion eaters disappeared into the shadows, leaving the midnight fiends alone amidst the carnage. Daniel exhaled slowly, his shoulders easing as the tension finally dissipated. The others gathered around him, their expressions a mixture of exhaustion and relief.
They'll be back,
Pamela said, her voice quiet but firm.
Let them come.
Daniel replied, his gaze lingering on the doorway where Leon had vanished.
Next time we'll be ready.
The circus ruins fell in silence. The air was still heavy with tension, but something unspoken lingered, relief. Daniel stood apart from the group, his posture stiff as if bracing himself for judgment. His eyes scanned his crew, the ones he had betrayed. Their faces were grim, but their exhaustion made their expressions harder to read. Julio was the first to step forward.
Let's get this out of the way, okay? You betrayed us. That's not something you forget. But you also risked everything tonight to save us. It does not erase what you did, but it counts for something. You didn't have to come back, but you did. Didn't you, Daniel?
Oliver nodded, his calm demeanor offering an anchor in the situation.
We vote. That's how we do things. I propose we readmit Daniel Reed into the crew.
The vote was quick and unanimous. Isabella remained silent, her eyes on Daniel as though assessing him. Oliver finally spoke again, breaking the silence.
Well, looks like you're back in, Daniel.
Daniel exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing for the first time.
Thank you,
he said, his voice quiet but sincere.
I know I betrayed your trust, and I know I can't undo it. But I swear to work hard to earn back what I lost.
Don't get too mushy on us.
Tom interrupted, grinning.
Just say you're sorry and let's move on.
A faint smile tugged at Daniel's lips. He stepped forward, his gaze sweeping the crew.
I'm sorry,
he said, meeting each of their eyes in turn.
For everything.
The group chuckled, the tension lifting slightly. Daniel extended a hand and one by one the others shook it. As the camaraderie settled, Daniel's expression darkened slightly.
But there's something you all need to know. My sanguine fealty to DuPont. It's still in effect. As long as it is, I'll always be a risk to you.
The group fell silent, the weight of his admission pressing down on them. Julio stepped forward with a thoughtful expression.
Maybe there's a way to deal with that. It will take some work, but I think I can come up with a solution.
Daniel's brow furrowed.
What are you thinking?
Give me some time. We'll figure it out.
A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. Daniel approached Isabella, extending a hand.
I don't think we've been formally introduced, Daniel.
She shook his hand, her grip firm.
Isabella.
Tom strolled over, grinning.
Isabella, you were amazing out there. Taking down both the Dagon and the Wolfman. That's some serious chops.
Just doing what I had to do to help the crew.
Oliver stepped up.
Welcome to the team, Isabella. You've earned your place here.
Her eyes widened slightly at the compliment, but she nodded.
Thank you.
As the group prepared to leave the ruins, Pamela approached Daniel. She stopped a few paces away, her eyes soft but her tone playful.
So, need a place to crash for the day?
Daniel raised an eyebrow.
Is that an invitation?
Pamela smirked, her gaze meeting his with unspoken meaning.
Maybe.
He smiled, the tension of the day finally melting away.
Lead the way.
The rest of the crew watched as the pair walked off, their quiet conversation fading into the night. For the Midnight Fiends, the night had been won, but the road ahead remained uncertain. Together they turned to the darkness, retreating to regroup for the battles yet to come. Later, in another place far from there, Pagliacci paced furiously near a decrepit altar, his grotesque painted face twisted with rage.
Do you have any idea how much this operation has cost me? My crew, gone! Everything I've built, ruined!
A slow, deliberate clap echoed from the darkness.
Spoken like a true businessman.
The crypt was cold and damp, the air filled with the smell of decay. The light of the flickering torches failed to reach the corners where darkness clung like a living thing. The shadows at the far end of the crypt stirred as Father Michael stepped into the dim torchlight. The midnight fiend was clad in his dark costume, his piercing eyes radiating disappointment rather than anger. Pagliacci's fury faltered as he took an instinctive step back.
Michael.
Your failure warranted it. You assured me the carrion eaters would be delivered. You promised the midnight fiends would be eradicated. Yet here we are.
Father Michael said coldly.
It wasn't my fault. Your child interfered. Daniel! He's the one who turned everything upside down!
Pagliacci's lip curled. Father Michael's eyes narrowed.
Daniel,
he repeated, his tone almost contemplative.
Yes, my son has always been a bit of a wild card, but your inability to anticipate such interference speaks to your own inadequacy.
Pagliacci growled, his claws twitching.
Do you think it was easy? They were stronger than anticipated. That girl, Isabella, she alone destroyed the Dago and the Wolfman.
Michael raised a hand, silencing him.
Excuses bore me, Pagliacci. Your failure is an inconvenience, not a catastrophe. We adapt. We move forward.
His voice was calm but carried an undeniable weight. Pagliacci's shoulders slumped slightly.
But what now? Everything I worked for...
Means nothing.
Michael interrupted sharply, stepping closer until their faces were mere inches apart.
The midnight fiends and carrion eaters are obstacles, nothing more. They are pawns in a game they don't even realize they're playing. Alas, thanks to your ineptitude, we must play a longer game. Still, what we have to gain is far greater than whatever you believe you lost. Since you fancy yourself the businessman, chalk it up to investment instead of loss.
Pagliacci flinched, but dared to meet the priest's gaze.
You have a plan, then?
Michael smiled faintly, though there was no warmth in it.
I always have a plan,
he said, stepping past Pagliacci toward the altar. He placed a hand on its cold surface, as if drawing strength from the ancient stone.
This setback is trivial. I've already set things in motion to achieve our goal through another path.
And what about Daniel?
Pagliacci asked. Michael turned, his expression a mix of amusement and menace.
Daniel's path and mine are destined to cross again. And then he will have to make a choice, join us or perish.
Michael turned and began to walk away, his footsteps echoing ominously in the crypt, without looking back. As his figure disappeared into the shadows, Pagliacci was left alone in the crypt. He slumped against the altar, his painted face cracking as his fury burned within him. For the first time in his long existence, Pagliacci felt not like the master of his circus, but like a clown in this macabre theater.